When I came in July 2002, the Institute I knew very well because I'd been working here as a project leader of the then called Acid Rain project in 1984 already. And then in 2000 I was also a council member for the Netherlands. So when I came to IIASA in 2002 as director, I'd been in several layers of the organizations. So that made my job relatively easy. I didn't have starting time like others might have had, because I knew the Institute from the inside and from the, let's say, the council's point of view. Nevertheless, it was a tough time in those days. The German NMO had been an observer rather than a member. The United States had been on the brink of leaving IIASA. And of course, at that time, we had to see how we could re-establish the full membership of both Germany and the United States as very crucial members of IIASA. Fortunately, that worked out very well in the first half year already of the Institute that I was here, the first half year I was here. A major thing was we had to cut costs, and a few things which really were dear to the Institute, namely, we had the conference center. I had to let it go and bring it back to the Gemeinde of Luxembourg. And also to restructure the Institute in terms of programs, some to be stopped and others to start. All in all, the plan was to cut costs for 25%, which we managed to do for about 20%. And that put enough confidence back into the United States and Germany that it was very quickly decided to return as full members. And when I look back at that, there's always a part that you can manage and there's a part that is luck. I never forget that afternoon in August 2002, a month after I had arrived, that Norman Neureiter, who was the chief scientist of the Secretary of State of the United States, Colin Powell at that time, he came and he saw the Institute, spoke with some YSS peers, summer students, and said, the US shouldn't leave IIASA. So he went back, spoke with the Secretary of State, and I don't know how, but somehow that influenced the decision-making, and the US came back as a real full-paying, supporting member of IIASA by the end of 2002. And Germany, similar things happened. A visitation committee came, they talked with the Austrian authorities, with the IIASA staff, and let's say by the end of the year, we had them back. I think that was important because this was still a period of change. We were losing some of our national member organizations, and say in the former Warsaw Pact countries, like Slovakia and Bulgaria. But we were gaining others. Before I came, China had joined. And when I was at IIASA, Egypt and India and Pakistan, South Korea and South Africa were the new members. So that was the real signal. We're really beyond an East-West institute. We're global. And I think that helped the Institute to really, let's say, re-establish its direction and get some connections that were real global connections. And of course, after that, other countries joined, like Brazil and Malaysia and so on, later. But that was the first kind of half dozen of new members that really were beyond the old East-West connection, the reason that IIASA was established in 1972. So, in terms of programs, with the having to cut some of the projects, the risk was that we would lose the social science input, because a few of the projects that suffered from that reduction were more social science than natural science. So what I tried to do is to, in the existing programs, like the one on air pollution or on land use, and agriculture and forestry, to bring more economics into it, so that we really could continue as an institute that would do multidisciplinary research. Also, let's say, the good old acid rain project that I started, I was the leader of from 84 till 87, got in its title also economic evaluation. So that it's going beyond the technology and the atmospheric chemistry and the meteorology to include economics. There have always been economics, but more in cost terms than in, let's say, what's the benefit in terms of economics. So the flagships of IIASA in that time were certainly the air pollution work. And I'm very happy that I've been with let's say half a dozen others at the initiation of it in '84, and it's one of those projects that really get the attention outside of IIASA. I left IIASA in 2002, joined the European Commission as a director of its institutes in Ispra, in Italy, and there I recognized that it's very much appreciated also from the outside, from the European Commission, especially the policy makers in climate and energy and environment, that IIASA has this function. So in the early days of this work, of the so-called RAINS model, it was recognized as a tool for negotiations in Europe, East and West. But later it became the tool for the European Commission whenever it needed to change its air pollution policies. So, let's say I would say in the last 15 years, no European directive on air quality was issued by the European Commission without having been based on results of IIASA calculations through the RAINS and later the so-called GAINS model, a combination of air pollution and greenhouse gases. So for me, it's a prime example how through, let's say, a solid collaboration within IIASA and with many people outside of IIASA and with a dedicated staff, you can build a tool. You don't build it overnight. And that's another lesson I learned in those years, not as director, but also before, and in the time that I was back in the Netherlands and not working at IIASA, but having many projects together, that you build the credibility slowly over time. The credibility in science, but also the credibility for the policymakers. Because they have to trust what we do as an institute. They have to develop a sense that we are unbiased, that we're not part of the negotiation process, although we are, let's say, like in my case, I'm Dutch, there was an American on the team, some Finnish people, Austrians, etc. We were not biased towards our nation states, but we're trying to be the independent scientists, bringing the best science as we knew it at that time to the negotiation tables. So various other projects at IIASA and at that time delivered similar results. In my time, we initiated the global energy assessment, and it took 6 years to complete it, and it's now there on the market since half a year or so, I think. And it's another, let's say, contribution of IIASA to integrated thinking, where people from different disciplines in relation with policymakers come together and inform them about the states of science. In the case of the global energy assessment, we got many countries involved, also paying. We also got the UN organizations involved, many different universities, other stakeholders in the gas and oil industry, to together produce the state of the energy in the world. And it's kind of the circle being closed a bit, because one of the great products that IIASA delivered around the time that I arrived for the first time at IIASA was also an energy book, a very Energy in a Finite World, a very thick book that was cited all over the world. And I'm pretty sure that this new IIASA product, on the the global energy assessment, will be cited as much as the 1970s, early 1980s Energy in a Finite World. I think because of the aging of the world, the work of the population program is very important. The research that's currently being done on, let's say, the relation between education and how the population structure evolves over time. The fact that we have big changes in Europe in terms of migration into the countries, the change of birth rates, the change of, for instance, the age that women get their first baby, that type of analysis that started already a decade ago, but in the current situation with the aging being an important issue for healthcare, for social welfare and so on, that is, I think, a major contribution IIASA could give to the world. For Europe, but also for many other parts of the world, in India as well as in China, as well in South America. The work IIASA is doing in climate change in various corners, in let's say, the emissions side, the impacts on forestry, the impacts on other ecosystems, will be well remembered, not only because every so many years there is an IPCC thick, let's say, 3,000 pages report or so, but the real contributions in the analysis of it, and especially, again, the contribution that IIASA gives to the negotiators. So when there is a next so-called conference of parties, that's where the countries meet to discuss the next policy steps, there's always some analysis of IIASA on the table, showing what it would cost to do this, or what the benefits would be to do something else, all the various alternatives that policymakers might consider. And IIASA is one of those. It's not the only one, but one of the very well recognized and continuing to be recognized deliverers of sound policy analysis. So that policy analysis part, I think, is going to be remembered well beyond today or next year. I learned one lesson, more than one, but one big lesson in those years that I was also attending the negotiations in Geneva on air quality in Europe. That is that IIASA is just one input. Science is just one input into the policy negotiation process. There are many more factors. So modesty from our side is always very important. Secondly, the last few years, the role of science has changed in the sense that with, let's say, the public discussions on climate, on GMOs, the genetically modified organisms, on biofuels, on the so-called carbon capture and storage, science was attacked from many corners of being not fair, not honest, or maybe too biased. So, compared with a few decades ago, science is not believed immediately, especially not by those who won't like the results that science comes up with. So we're more part, I would say, we're more part of society than before. It's the ivory tower that tells the public what the truth is non-existent anymore. And I think we have to just to recognize that. We can't change it, and we have to go with it. And see what our role then will be, which will be much more participatory, so that we listen also to the public, what the general feelings are, not adapt our science, not at all, but easily realizing that when we bring scientific results to the fore in public or in policy analysis, that we know and understand what the public's or the government's reactions might be, which is quite different now than it was years ago, and especially what's called ClimateGate played an important role there. But when I now see the discussions on biofuels, and I've seen, especially in Europe, the discussions on GMOs, you see that that the first statement I made on science is just one player in it, one input in the policy process, is really true. Because certainly in GMOs, you see the same scientific evidence leading to totally different conclusions in North America than in Europe. So it's not the science that determines then the results, it's the let's say, perception and policy. IIASA holds a unique position I think for various reasons. One is that it has most of the large countries involved, in most of the large countries in the world as a partner, as a member, or they have a member organization there, which is rarely so. Secondly, it's now, let's say, it's global. It's not just Europe and North America and Japan. It has Asia, major countries, larger and smaller ones in Asia and in Africa, and now also in Latin America. And thirdly, it's this blend of different sciences that work together, which is very difficult to do. And in my experience, it needs a long time of collaboration before people really understand the science from the other side, before the biologist understands the economist and vice versa. You can't throw a few economists and biologists together to stick to that example for half a year and hope that they produce something useful, jointly biology and economics. But JASA is the place where this type of collaboration in various combinations of science has worked for many, many years. So it takes time to establish that. And I think the funding mechanisms of most of our science in most of the world is such that you get a project for a few years, you have to do it and to show it, and then you go to the next project. The continuity that JASA provides in the fields of environment, like air pollution, has been there for 30 years almost, and agriculture and land use and forestry and population and energy. We needed that to establish the solid collaboration, not only within JASA, but also with large networks of scientists outside of JASA. And I think that's another part. That's number 4. I have been in various universities in the Netherlands. I'm currently working at the European Commission at the Joint Research Center. But I haven't seen such a large network of collaboration in the various fields of research that JASA covers as in JASA. So that makes it unique, and another 40 years lie ahead of us.